What's up, YouTube? Capital G here. We're talking YCS Chicago, Illinois, and asking the question, what did we learn from this event? What are we going to take from this event moving forward, as this was our first YCS in the April 1st, 2015 ban list, and it should be a pretty good indicator of things to come. And, you know, we can look at this for trends, see what type of decks were successful, see what people were playing. But this is a little weird of situation because TCG World Superstars is coming out within a week. I think it's actually 5 days. So that set could not only empower a lot of our meta decks, but it could create others. So the set could throw a monkey wrench in all the data that we could collect from this YCS. So, I mean, it is going to be a little strange of a situation. We'll have to tread lightly. Now, as far as the decks that topped, I think that most people, if you would have went around and polled most players who play the game competitively, probably would have got a lot of these right. In fact, in my Evil Swarm video, I said that I thought that right now that there were 5 meta decks. Obviously, those would be Necros, Tellarknights, Shadows, BA, and Cleaforts. And, I mean, predictably, those were the decks that got it in the most. Those were the decks that took up most of the top spots, and I thought that everything else should be considered rogue. Now, that doesn't mean that rogue decks can't still beat your ass, or they can't top, or they still can't do well, or that they don't have great matchups against some of these meta decks. It's just, these are the decks that I think you're going to see the most if you play in a premier event. Like, these are the decks that I would primarily side for the most and expect to play the most, because I think that they're going to have the numbers on their side. Predictably, Necros, I mean, they won the event. I don't really think that that's relevant because the top 16, if I'm not mistaken, is all played through draft, but they had the most numbers when it came to the top 32. Now, a lot of people were expecting Necros to be like tier 0, and oh my god, now that Cleafort are dead, there'll be nothing to control Necros. I said it on Pojo a lot. I felt like Cleafort were holding every other deck down way more than they were holding Necros down. Like, Cleafort weren't really controlling Necros, but they were like auto winning against Tellarknights and Spirit Beasts and Yosenju when they flipped over Skill Drain. So I didn't think that that deck getting hit hard was going to make Necros infinitely better. You've seen the players adjust. Everybody just runs Mind Crush now because it's super great against most of the meta, and it's super great against Necros. So I didn't think that Necros were pretty much going to get better. I just thought that they would kind of stay the same or definitely get a little weaker. And I think if you break it down by the numbers, that actually did happen. Necros at like the most recent YCS, I think out of the top 16, they were taking like 14 and 13 spots. I mean, you're talking like 75% and over, and at this event I think it's probably a little less than 60%, probably about 55% of the top was Necros, and then the 45% was the other. I'm not going to do the exact math. Now, I will say this, I was pleasantly surprised by the amount of Tellarknights in the top 32, or just the Tellarknight success. Now, don't get me wrong, I never doubted Tellarknight's actual like competitiveness. I don't doubt how good the deck is. I mean, for heaven's sake, I play the deck. I know that the deck is amazing. You just take the core of Stratos, Wolfbark, and Barrier, you put them at 3, and you're going to have a really good deck, let alone the Trevor plays, the looping, or the Call of the Haunted, where you flip over a Call of the Haunted, go +2, you make Trevor from there and just win. But, you know, Tellarknights is never going to be a deck, in my personal opinion, that's ever going to be so powerful that it's considered the best deck. Like, Tellarknights it's strange because considering all the cards and how consistent the deck is and the great toolbox, I think it's always going to be a deck between a tier 1 and tier 1.5, which also means I don't think that Tellarknights are ever going to be in danger of getting hit. Like, I don't think Konami's ever going to look at S-Knights and think, man, we need to get rid of, you know, Deneb at 3 or something. Like, the only thing that I think that could possibly happen to the deck is like indirect hitting cards like Rhoda or Call of the Haunted going to 1 or something like that. So I think that the future looks very, very bright for Tellarknights, and I don't think Konami's gonna give us an extra deck card that's ever gonna be better than Trevor. Like, he's as good as it gets. It's not gonna get better than that. Now, one of the things that did surprise me, I kind of thought about it and I was hoping for it, but even in my heart, I didn't necessarily know if I believe it, was I think we can definitively say that Shadows are back, because for a while, it really looked like Shadows had got power creeped. It looked like their effects just didn't matter, because I think it was we moved from a game in Duelist Alliance where everything was extra deck based. If you look at Yangzing and BA and S-Knights, everything, you know, kind of used its extra deck. And then we moved to a game where the extra deck didn't really matter that much, you know, or at least not in a conventional way. Necros and Cleaforts and Yosenju, they weren't going into the extra deck that much. So you weren't getting free shut-off fusions, and Wenda just wasn't really doing that much, as Wenda just, she was a card that got easier and easier to get off the board with Carrier and, you you know, Farfa coming out, and which was it Comma 1 that bounces. So that card kind of lost some of its power, but I feel like there are two cards specifically that Shadows have kind of integrated, and Burning Abyss have done the same thing. And I feel like they've taken some of those problems that Shadows have had and they've kind of fixed them. The first card, obviously, and I feel like they're kind of both meta choices. The first card is Mistake, and you guys have seen what Burning Abyss do with Mistake, especially again YCS Prague. Flip over Mistake and just win the game against Necros. It kills the Necros matchup, and it really hurts Teller Knights because, you know, no Deneb, no Rhoda, no party. And then if you look at breakthrough skill, I've seen a lot of Shadow players starting the main deck a couple of copies of this card, and not only does it stop the Altier or the Deneb, making sure the Teller Knight player never gets started, but it does the same exact thing against the Necros match. It stops the Manju Sanju, the cards that you don't want your opponent using to get off the ground, and then you obviously can save it for the Trishula, the card that just is the blowout. The card that takes your train and knocks it off the rails. And then during your turn, if your opponent tries to do their little sneaky in-phase Call of the Haunted on a Deneb or an Altier, you can breakthrough skill that, or you can banish it for an Abyss Dweller, or more importantly for a Necros of Unicorn, because Unicorn does a ton of damage to Shadows and it does a ton of damage to Burning Abyss, because Dante should be able to attack over Unicorn, but he can't. And you know, when you summon Construct, you want to get all those plus effects and just run his ass over, but you can't. So I feel like those two cards have really changed some of your best or some of the matchups that should be bad. I also think that, I said this in another video, the Cleavefort matchup used to be really bad for Shadows. It used to be, if you didn't open with multiple MST cards or MST mimic cards, like a mathematician can send dragon, so it's kind of like an MST. If you didn't open with multiples, you would just lose, because A, you needed one to cover the scout, and then you needed another one to cover the breakthrough skill, or excuse me, the vanity's emptiness or the skill drain. And if you didn't have multiple MSTs, Shadows would just get pooped on by Cleavefort. And now I feel like that matchup is either more 50-50 or more kind of like 55-45 in the way of the Shadow player. So I feel like Shadows are definitely back, and when Lilith comes out, I mean, man, they might be knocking on the door of like potentially the best deck. Like when Lilith comes out, you could see this number right here potentially double, like go to like 6 or maybe even 7. Now, Cleavefort was a deck that everybody kicked dirt on, and I was kind of in that party. I was like, man, yo, Senju are better now. All right, here's what I didn't think a lot of people, even myself, considered initially, and that was that the pendulum mechanic is still it's wildly ahead of everything else. It's still so ridiculously good, because you can pendulum summon into torrentials, into not solemn warnings, but you can attack with your pendulum monsters into Mirror Force, and all the destruction your opponent throws at you, it's like it just makes you more powerful. Like it doesn't really matter, because that mechanic is nowhere near getting power creeped. The fact that you can incorporate cards like Storm, you can blow your own crap up and then play Scout and get it all back and just attack your opponent with it. Like, the pendulum mechanic is still going to make this deck highly playable. And even though the deck lost so many of its floodgate cards, it can still just integrate like actual defense cards like Phoenix Chain, which you can bounce with Stealth, and then obviously Recreate, even though it isn't as good as Skill Drain, because if you know the ruling and you know that it has to be a mandatory Chain Link 1, then again, it's not as good as Skill Drain, but it doesn't cost life points, it's searchable through Scout, and you can bounce it through Self. So between all those three things, I feel like it's more than enough to replace that. And I actually saw it in I believe it was this feature match right here. Yeah, this was the feature match. A guy, like, he got complete control in game 2, and then he had towers, and it was like, all right, well, did we not realize that, you know, most decks in Yu-Gi-Oh! Only run like 1 or 0 outs to towers? And when you have a card that you can summon and just win the game off of by itself, and it's searchable, come on now, like, the deck is never really going to go away, at least not in the foreseeable future. So this was for the most part what I kind of expected. I thought Burning Abyss kind of just did what Burning Abyss did. I thought that Tellers performed much better than I expected. I think we can definitively say that Shadows are back. I think that Cleavefort are not close to being dead, and I guess the strongest rogue deck right now is Spirit Beast. I mean, don't get me wrong, I still like Evil Swarm and Fire Fist as like very good rogue decks, but the one good thing about Spirit Beast is the fact that much like Necros or Burning Abyss, it can go first and it can say, all right, we've got 5 cards, but if we get a good hand, we can turn those 5 cards into potentially 6 or 7. And we know that even if we don't draw good defensive cards, if we don't draw the Solemn Warning or the Bottomless or the Fiendish Chain, we can just go ahead and go Infernity. We can just search our power traps and we know that we're in a good situation. And then obviously just the ability to uncontact and, you know, dodge targeting cards is just like, that's really, really good. So let me know what you guys think. It's going to be interesting to see how World Superstars kind of affects this meta, but I think that this is kind of what we expected. Necros aren't doing as good as they did last format, despite the fact that they won and despite the fact that they're still highly played, because I believe after Swiss there were like 2 Tellarknight players in the top 5 or something like that. So I don't know, it's kind of what I expected for the most part. Thank you guys for watching as always.